Okay. You can hear me good?
Yes, all good.
Okay. Okay, so you're low. Let me turn this up all the way. Okay, great. Thank you for joining me. And so before I get started, I'm just going to ask for your consent. So the purpose of this interview is to just gain your information and see your perspective on the topic that I'm exploring. And the topic is teaching social justice pedagogy for adult learners in a higher ed space. And so I have a series of questions here. Actually, I have 8 questions here. And so I just want to have your consent to record and to record your responses as well.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so before we get started and dive into the questions, I just want you to, if you will, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you are in the program, and what your goals are.
Yes, so I am a first year counseling psychology PhD student at the University of Memphis, and this is my first semester. I am originally from Memphis, but I moved to Knoxville and lived there for 13 years. So this is my first time back at Memphis too. So,
Okay, and it's PhD counseling. Okay, so you're a first semester. Okay.
yes, first ever. That's what I say.
Congratulations. So how does it feel? I mean, so you're almost done with the first semester. How's it?
It's honestly, it's so interesting. It reminds me more of like my undergraduate program than my master's. I guess my master's, it was in mental health counseling. It was a lot more relaxed. And I kind of like this pace better because I did my undergraduate at the University of Tennessee, and just they're very high academic demands. And so that kind of familiarity felt good. But I was like, whoa, I haven't done this in a while. So
Okay. All
yes.
right. And so you said that you went to school here in Memphis?
I grew up here. I went to like elementary school here, but I went to my undergrad at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And then I went to my master's at Lincoln Memorial University, which is a smaller private college. And they had a campus in Knoxville.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So again, just congratulations on almost finishing your first semester.
Thank
So
you.
how long is the program? Is it 3 to 5 years as well, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So they do, it's called a 3+1. So you do 3 years on campus, and then your last year is your internship and your dissertation defense and stuff like that.
Wow. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to jump in. Like I said, I have a series of 8 questions here, and I want this to be very organic, so it may take us
Yes.
down wherever it leads us, okay? But I do have a number of questions I do want to ask.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
so as I mentioned, the topic has to deal with adult learners, right?
Mhm.
In a higher ed space. So how would you define an adult learner?
I would say I can be super technical. I would put adult as, anyone above the age of 18, um, in a sort of any type of academic based program, whether that is someone in a trade school, in a college, in a certification program, anywhere where they are taking in information and then being tested on their abilities and competencies with that information.
Okay. And so that's interesting. You had a numeric value there, 18. So do
Mhm.
you think, so is 18 like a threshold for you? Is it because, and how did you come up with that number?
So I came up with that just of that's kind of where research starts when it comes to terming adults. Now, if I really want to get into the nitty gritty of, development wise, I would always pair adults to be starting in the mid 20s,
Oh, wow.
personally.
Okay.
But I think that's kind of like that psychology brain side of me of just kind of like what is an adult. But I think like 18 is just kind of the easy basis because that's like the legal age. And so that's kind of where I start with that.
Okay, great. I love that. Okay, great. Um, so tell me, how familiar are you with social justice pedagogy? And it takes on many different labels. Some people call it critical pedagogy. Some people call it social justice education. So how familiar are you with that term?
So I have actually never heard of the term is it pedagogy? Okay, I have no idea what that means, to be
Okay.
completely honest. Yes.
Okay, so let me just give you a quick blurb about it. Okay, so pedagogy basically means the teaching strategies or your approach to teaching a certain topic. Okay,
Okay.
this case is about social justice. So, how can a university, or how well does a university look to implement those type of practices in their curriculum and also in their classrooms, and what that looks like? So, I know that this is your first semester here at the university. But in prior classes or prior graduate programs, have you heard this term? Have you ever heard it mentioned or alluded to or incorporated it in your classes or curriculum?
I would say not so bluntly in that of
Okay.
just kind of like, hey, this is like, we're going to focus on social justice here and how that we're going to like bring this into this class. I will say I've done, with my undergraduate experience, I've done a lot of social psychology courses and kind of group, psychopathology classes. But it was always just kind of like, this is a day lesson. It wasn't so much as like a full integrated course load. And with my master's program, we learned about multicultural counseling, but really not a whole lot on like advocacy or justice. Now, the term would be brought up, and you'd see that I feel like you see that a lot in like the syllabus, like you scroll down about, advocacy, but nothing that was really dove into in detail.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And just hindsight, why do you think that is? Do you why do you think that is?
I will say, I really think a big part of that was because the schools that I'm talking about were in Knoxville, and Knoxville is a predominantly white area. And it's also very, I'm trying to think of the word. There's not a lot of progression there.
Okay.
Knoxville, I feel like, especially coming back to Memphis, Knoxville is kind of stuck in time a little bit when it comes to education. And, I see the efforts there, but there's really not a lot. And for example, my master's program, we had one person of color in the whole program. And they weren't even in mental health counseling, they were in school counseling. So the mental health counseling department had little to no diversity. And that's even with the administration too, all the professors were white.
Okay.
And so I think that has some contribution to that. I think it's just not something that is really talked about a lot because it's not really an issue that's brought to them a lot, to be completely honest. And so I would say like there's efforts there, but I do genuinely think it's because Knoxville is also just really, really behind when it comes to, social advocacy.
Okay. And so again, I know this is your first semester in the program here at Memphis. Have you heard that terminology or have you seen any efforts towards that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So for my program, we have certain core classes we have to take. And one of them that you have to take your first semester is the foundations course, which is like foundation of counseling psychology. And I think for each class is 3 hours long, once a week. For the first 4 weeks, we really influenced social justice into practice and social justice issues revolving around the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, and what Division 17, which is counseling psychologists, can do to kind of change that. And we've even watched 2 seminars from Division 17 regarding social justice. And so it was really comforting because I felt like that was really what they put on the front end of the class. And it really sets you up for the rest of the material you learn in the course. Like right now we're learning about ethics, and I read our professor gives you articles to read, and she gave one about how they were studying insomnia in different populations and found that Black adult women with insomnia needed a more specifically based therapy approach than non-Black women participants with insomnia. And I just thought that was like very eye-opening to me of really like honing that in of making that like a core focal point of counseling psychology, and it just kind of showing that it's everywhere in all parts of that career.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I never would have known that. That is awesome. So, and I love
Mhm.
what you said that it's at the beginning of that particular course. So look, this is on the forefront. This is what we're going to begin with. So let me
Mhm.
ask you this. Um, how large is that class? Is it pretty large or?
It's pretty small. So my cohort, there's 6 of us total.
So when that was first introduced, how did the other members um respond to that? Did you notice anything, or maybe can you recall some of the conversation around it? Yeah.
I know that there's some people that are very passionate about it, and there's some people that you could tell were really listening and taking in, and it was pretty like evenly divided, like 3 and 3. I think a lot of that also has to do with personality, because the class is in a discussion forum format, so you get the prompt and then you kind of discuss through it. um there was a lot, everyone was very comfortable from the beginning, which is kind of interesting because we all came from all over the place. Like no one in our cohort was from Memphis even. So that was really cool that everyone felt like really safe to open up freely, and I think that really set the tone for the rest of the courses.
Okay, that's interesting. So
Mhm.
what can you attribute that to? Is it just because this is the first time in your program, so everybody wants to be best foot forward, or it's just maybe prior experiences? What do you attribute that to?
I would definitely say it's a blend of both. A lot of It's also all women in my cohort. So I'll just refer to like,
Okay.
they're she, her, but so a lot of the women there have their prior research experience was somewhere around social justice if they were in a master's program before. There also is a lot more diversity in my cohort. We have Native American, we have a Black woman in our cohort. We have a lot of people that represent the LGBTQIA plus community. So I think that also contributes to that too. But there is a lot that have also had previous research experience in social justice advocacy,
Okay. Okay. I
or
can.
it's what their current research interests are. So I know 2 or 3 are wanting to focus on what is it called? Sexuality and sexual protection, but they also want to focus it more coherently. Like I know one person wants to focus on um sexual assault in Black women.
Yeah.
And there are other people that want to do like sexual assault with transgender. So I think that also contributes to that as well, of their comfortability.
Okay.
Mhm.
Perfect. Okay, so part of the pedagogy for social justice is dialogue. So having those conversations, and sometimes having those tough conversations, depending on your perspective and your
Mhm.
prior experience. So, what challenges have you experienced, if any, so far in the program in terms of talking around those sensitive or could be sometimes controversial
Mhm.
topics?
Oh yeah, totally. I think that's also a really good question. Will say I think a challenge for me personally is um not like really making sure I know what I'm talking about, but also like knowing how to say, hey, I don't know what this means. Can you explain, without seeming kind of like it's not, hey, I don't know this because I didn't care to look into that, but I truly was not educated on this. And
Okay.
so that is one thing where it's like, hey, I want to support you and I want to advocate for you and I want to learn more. Like, can you please, like, I don't understand where you're coming from. Can you tell me how, like your experience with this? And so it's really learning like also when to speak up and ask those questions, because when you're in a discussion class like that, some people, those topics can bring a lot of emotion. And
Right.
sometimes they will even say, I had a personal response to this, like a personal traumatic, response to some of the topics. And so it's really learning too of like, okay, I don't know what they're talking about now, but like I'm not going to ask while they're in the middle of saying this. Let me try and like hear them out. So it's really just like knowing timing of when to speak up and when to ask questions without being insensitive, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, that's a delicate dance there, right?
It
So
is.
let me ask the your instructor, your professor,
Mhm.
what role has he or she played in this in setting the atmosphere? I've read an article before where we talked about safe spaces. That's something that's really a buzzword, I would say. But then we talked about how we can transform safe spaces into brave spaces where we actually have the opportunity to know when, like what you just mentioned, when to speak, when the timing, the tone, and those kinds of things. So
Mhm.
how do you feel your professor help set that stage if they did it all?
Absolutely. So, my professor, Dr. Lees, she, one thing that she does before each discussion topic is she gives us 5 to 6 research articles in relation to the topic. Now, some of these articles are controversial,
Yeah.
some of these articles are informative. And then on Wednesday, so we meet on Fridays. On Wednesday, we have a discussion post and we share our thoughts, and we have to make at least 3 points to the articles. We don't have to touch on all of them, but ones that spoke out to us. She will read the discussion post, and then she will bring up in the discussion on Friday, hey, Maddie, you brought this up about this article. What are y'all's thoughts on this topic?
Mhm.
And it just kind of bounces off from there. So she's really more of like a facilitator,
Okay.
but she only did that for the first 3 weeks. Then now what she's done is part of an assignment is each student has to then lead a discussion for the rest of the semester. So, and the thing is all the topics are already assigned, all the readings are assigned. We are just responsible for how are you going to lead this discussion. And so I, unbeknownst to me, signed up first, and I was very, very nervous, but
Uh-huh.
she does a really good job of knowing when to shift gears, but also knowing when to kind of support. But she also really likes to bring challenge. So she will say, okay, what would you do if you were working with a supervisor who disagreed with that statement? How are you going to practice? And so she really does allow growth, but she's really kind of stepped back to let the students guide it. And I genuinely think that has helped make the space feel kind
Okay.
of from safe to brave. So I thought
Okay.
that was really cool. And I think too, being intentional with making it a small class, not having a whole
Mhm.
lot of students in there.
Okay. Oh, that's a good point. Do you think, I'm just gonna throw this off, not totally off script.
Okay.
Because you mentioned that your cohort are all women, right? All
Mhm.
female. So do you think that would be um the same if there was a male presence there?
We actually talked about that in one of our class discussions, and one of my classmates, she's hilarious, but she was like, I don't care, I'll be biased. Yes. She was like, I'm totally fine not having a man in this cohort right now, kind of thing. So
Okay.
yeah, but it's kind of funny though, because our professor, her research focus is masculinity. And
Mhm.
so she kind of had a different perspective. And so it's very blended in the group. But I do think I also went to an all-girls school when I lived in Memphis. I went to Hutchinson.
Oh, yeah.
So I naturally am just comfortable being more kind of women surrounded,
Yeah.
but that's also another personal, that's just because that's what I grew up with.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let me get back on script here. So in talking about dialogue and having those conversations, I want to shift a bit and talk about social media. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm gonna read this statement and I want to get your initial response to it. So social media will continue to evolve, but it is here to stay. We owe it to ourselves to consider the ways in which it is changing the nature of our public discourse and, through those changes, the manner in which we govern ourselves. Our democracy is being changed for the better, 140 characters at a time.
Hmm.
So, what's your initial response to that?
Um, when you said for the better, I kind of raised my eyebrows a little
Okay.
bit.
Okay.
Um, I see social media as just the way that the platform is now. It's not just, you see what your close friends post, you're seeing what people all over the world post. And I genuinely think the benefits of that are you are being a lot more exposed to different cultures and different opinions. And I think that's good. I think it's good to be exposed to different thoughts and values and beliefs than what your norm is. On the other end of that, a lot of people post things without, support and research that are actually like hurting communities more than helping them. And so I think it really, it's kind of like that dance that we talked about earlier of just, really knowing what you're taking in and knowing what you post and really being mindful of it, especially with digital footprints. But I will say, in regard to kind of like the social aspect of it, I do think that it's just like, it's kind of like a weapon. It's how you use it, the intention behind it. I genuinely think there is good in it, but I do see a lot of flaws and how those flaws can sometimes be pretty big.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So in terms of social justice, and I'm going back to another article I've read, particularly during COVID. And
Mhm.
so with a lot of social justice issues going on in the world at that time, social media, because everybody was on shutdown, was a way to get the information out
Yes.
and get it out quickly.
Mhm.
So one would assume the intent was just to share knowledge, right? But then you had this piece to come about where it's social justice, and we're talking about all the inadequacies and inequities that appear across the globe. So in terms of social justice pedagogy and social media, um, do you feel like they complement each other? Or do you think, like to use your words, you just said it's all about how you use the weapon?
I think it could be. I think they could work together. Especially like when you said of just getting the information out there quickly. And like I was thinking, where I was during COVID on lockdown, like I was living downtown with my roommates. I wasn't even with my family. And
Right.
so when I lived downtown in Knoxville and all of the stuff that came out with the George Floyd incident, I would have had no idea about that. And also like I will say, I think it can be helpful because it can show you how certain news stations can manipulate information. And rather than I'm looking at a raw video, no captions, no text, I'm looking at what I'm seeing now. And you'd be surprised how that can get twisted around based on a headline from a news
Mhm.
source. So I do think that the rawness of social media could work well with the social justice pedagogy because it has that kind of, it can be authentic at times and it can get information out really fast.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Good. Let me ask you this. In terms of, we talked about the dialogue within your class, with your cohort. Is there, and let's just say there's a topic that you're discussing and you jump on, or one of your cohort members jumps on social media and posts saying, look, this is what we talked about in class. Let's just say about, going back to the study you talked about with Black women and insomnia, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and so she posts, just put something out there on social media. Would you take issue to that, or how do you feel about having so much of a safe space and what happens, and we talk about in class, making its way to social media? How do you feel about that?
I have kind of mixed emotions about that. One, I'm worried about like the safety of confidentiality in group and not so much of like, okay, yeah, like that's an important topic. Obviously, I'm okay with that being shared, but there are some stuff in class where people share personal experiences that lead to their decisions. And because the class is so small, it is pretty private. So
Yeah.
that's the only issue that I would have a problem with is not so much exposure on topic, but the personal information that's being shared. And if not everyone's on board for that to be shown publicly, I would probably have, a little discomfort with that.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask you, if the person was to post that in the frame or the intention of advocacy, like,
Mhm.
look, this is what we talked about in class, not necessarily naming names, but you know that because you were there in the space that you read that okay, I know who said what and where this is coming from. Would your opinion on that change?
Yes, I think, yeah, I think it's because like about the posts and stuff. So if they were like, okay, this is what we talked about in class, like this is an important subject matter, and I know I was in that class and I know who posted it, I would be okay with that, as long as it's not like exposing, because people will talk about really personal stuff. Like we'll have people talk about like medical conditions they have. And I think it's because we've built such a trusting relationship with each other. That's the only time where I'm like, okay, let's try to advocate without, exposing somebody. Because if you have a friend who has a private, social media account, then they probably don't want you posting them on your account, if that makes sense.
It does total sense. And you actually brought up the next point I wanted to kind of talk about, because in your class, obviously there's a great relationship or rapport, and it's somewhat built on trust, right? And that's developed over time. So I know that you mentioned earlier too, that in your prior experience at UTK, there was not much, if any, reference to social justice and those type of topics. So in terms of the higher ed perspective, what do you think? Hold on, let me phrase this correctly. I don't want to lead too much. Do you feel higher ed has a responsibility to explore and expose adult learners to social justice pedagogy?
Yes, I think all educators, it doesn't have to be just high ed.
Okay.
I think like I mean, it's a culture. It's what our social life is now. And so I think it's the same of, sitting in class in elementary school, learning about, Martin Luther King Jr. I think that's something that people need to learn, because I genuinely think that's how we can grow in better relationships with mixed communities. So especially with higher education, like what you're learning in class is really kind of so focused on your career. Like everyone's like, oh, you have so much fun in your master's program because you're actually learning stuff you care about. Well, yeah, I think like social justice should definitely be something that educators should, teach and stuff. Now, I will say with that, just because you're an educator doesn't mean you're an expert. So I do think there should be another level of an educator to have qualifications to teach social justice, if that makes sense.
It does. And so I was going to just follow up with that. Going back to the types of conversations and dialogues being a major component of this type of practice, instructional practice, the level of trust. And so how do you feel, or how do you think higher ed educators can develop that in such a short period of time, so that you can get to the dialogue that does inform one's opinion to hopefully advocate for one group or another? So how do you think educators can get that sense of trust established soon enough so that the type of advocacy work can begin?
I'm trying to think from like what I've seen from personal experience. I think one thing that's really helpful with higher education teachers is a lot of them have publications on research. And I think it's really cool seeing some of their publications or some of the things that they're currently working on is in relation to social justice matters. And because I think that shows effort and passion, but they have a lot of exposure to data that they've learned from people through social justice issues. So I definitely think that would be really helpful. Like I'm thinking, first day of class, professors introducing themselves, they could probably show things that they're interested in their publications and what they found of, like, for example, Dr. Lee, she's like, I study masculinity and also, advocacy issues in different minority groups and stuff like that. So she has, it's a niche topic, but it is in relation to how it can be applied to social justice issues. So I think that opening up could be really helpful, of just kind of knowing, okay, this is what they're interested in. This is what they've been doing.
Okay, good. So you talked about more of, I guess, from the academic perspective, in terms of an educator. Like if you walk into a class and your professor says, okay, this is the topic, and, this is the course or the focus of the class, and I'm going to teach from a social justice pedagogy perspective, right? Do you feel like, besides the academic piece, would you look for your professor to have any other qualities or qualifications to help them be able to engage in that type of practice? I know you mentioned they're not necessarily experts
Mhm.
But what qualifications would you look for in an instructor?
I think I would also look at their involvement like through the university as well, but also kind of, I don't want to say too much of like their personal life, but one thing that comes to mind is my professor will be like, hey, they're doing this event is happening this weekend at Shelby Farms. It's about, I remember one time they were doing it. It was about, oh, I know what it was. She was talking about the two events it was like a big football game between two historically Black colleges. And she was kind of talking about that, like, hey, this is what's going on this weekend. So she kind of tied like current events into the class that were related to kind of, social justice and reasonings and like the history and the importance of like why these events happen. And I think also seeing professors part of things that aren't necessarily teaching, like diversity committee. That's
Okay.
like a big one that's in our program, or the forum committee. And they will ask the students, hey, what do we need to kind of push more for in these, in these sort of organizations and stuff. So I think that kind of part too of like really kind of seeing their personality and involvement outside of a classroom and how they're tying it into the class, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Yes,
Okay.
definitely. What challenges do you think to scale? Let's just take the University of Memphis. And you mentioned what's taking place in your particular program. I don't know how prevalent or widespread that is across the university. That's still something I'm researching. But what challenges do you think university wide the university may have towards implementing such a practice in their
I
curriculum?
think that's a good question, because it's also my first semester. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to like take in, because my GA, I work with undergrad students. So I'm trying to see if there's stuff that they have. I think it's really getting the word out there to all the students. I think, there are some students that aren't involved in like super niche, like
Mhm.
not every student there is in counseling psychology. They probably don't know that there's a diversity committee. Stuff like that, I think, is like just getting the information out to all the students in areas that might not be like areas or degrees that aren't very diverse or very like focused on culture and social justice. Like I'm thinking, um, I wonder students that are majoring in engineering, how much exposure they have to that. So that's kind of where I would say would be a challenge.
Okay. No, a few other questions here.
Mhm.
Talked about dialogue changing. Okay. Um, so going forward, if you were to the current class that you're taking, that you're talking about, the discussion-based class,
Mhm.
um, going for if you had the opportunity to revamp or revise that course
Mhm.
based on what you know or understand social justice pedagogy to be,
Mhm.
what changes, if any, would you make?
I would want to have more. I really like external like speakers or videos and stuff like that, like outside resources. I think I think that's hard because stuff is limited already. But I would say that would really be the only like one of the things I would change is really trying to implement more to make it seem like, hey, this isn't just seen in psychology. This is an everyday life occurrence. So just making things more applicable to real world.
Okay, and then as just as a follow-up, one important component to social justice is making sure that you are an agent of change or you advocate for whatever particular focus you may have. Do you feel, just generally speaking, adult learners will need support in having knowing how to do that, or you think that that's just an innate ability they come to the classroom with?
Mhm.
Advocate.
See, that's a good question, because when I was applying for Memphis, that was one of the questions for my application was, what's your experience with like social justice and multicultural communities? And what's something you want to like advocate for? And it was like kind of, your mindset on that. So I do know that that's what they seek for in students. But I do know that's not the case in every degree.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in those specific types of classes, like I think if you're doing anything that's community based or working with people or populations, that's kind of something that I would expect the students to already kind of have innately.
Okay.
However, if I'm thinking of like wanting to, for all students across all different types of degrees, I think there should also be some sort of level of helping them, kind of seeing where they're at and then trying to help them and hold them accountable to really make that their own decision and choice. But I think, like, again, if they don't know what it is, then they're not going to, you know, have that mindset. So that's why I really think it's important for that to be shared in all across all types of like education classes and degrees.
Okay. I'm thinking of years and years ago as a first time um college student, just undergrad. One of
Mhm.
it used to be mandatory. Things have changed, is that freshmen had to take, or first year students had to take what's called a study skills course, where they had, it's like half a semester, so many weeks, 6 to 7 weeks, where they were given or assigned an advisor, and it helped them like plot out their guide to how they want to manage their time and how they want to study, and the resources that's available to them on campus and where to go if you had this type of question. So it was mandatory. It's part of the course of study.
Mhm.
In terms of advocacy, do you think the university, how do you feel if you were a first year student and part of your program of study is taking a class on advocacy, how to become an advocate? What
Mhm.
would be your actions or your response to that?
I would be totally for that. I think with advocacy, like it kind of has a domino effect. So, like, even starting with something small, like, you know, advocating if, you know, a student is being mistreated by their roommate or something like that, I feel like that can trickle to being more comfortable of like advocating for larger social justice issues. Because I also think, you know, going to UT and, you know, the University of Memphis has a pretty big, like, student number, but I mean, University of Tennessee is massive.
Yeah.
So I know there are probably some social justice issues just within the university between, you know, students and professors and, you know, um, other people on the board and stuff like that. So I would be totally for that because I feel like you not offering that is almost like denying that that exists. And I feel like that's just kind of ignorant. Yeah.
Great point. I love that. Okay. I love that. Okay, let me just real quick. I've enjoyed this uh, conversation.
I know, me too. That's a really good topic. So I'm excited. This is awesome.
Thanks. Okay, so let me just make sure I got everything covered. Social media. Okay. So I have, yeah, I've covered all the pre-planned questions that I have. Do you want to add anything, or you think of anything that you may find that had not discussed or touched on that you may be beneficial to this conversation?
One thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about like the advocacy course, I think, I mean, I know it's hard with like big communities, but when I was in high school in Knoxville, we had to do some sort of like community-based work as like part of our capstone project.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I feel like that would be cool if like certain programs or departments would have that for students to be more exposed to learning about, you know, social justice issues. And I think that's why, you know, for me, I did in my undergraduate at University of Tennessee, it wasn't required, but I was like, I need to do something community based. So I was a young life leader at a magnet school in downtown Knoxville, kind of more like near the inner city area. And it was, I think it was 98% Black and 2% Hispanic Latino. And it was so eye-opening that I didn't realize how much was going on literally a mile away from me. Like the
Wow.
school was so close. And I mean, they were having school shootings, but they were gang related. So the police didn't really do anything about it. And like the only really option they had was they had a one metal detector and everybody had to wear clear backpacks. And I was like, okay, what about the mental health of these kids? Like these kids are 16 years old. Like these girls that I'm like got leading right now are wanting to go to college, and now they don't know what to do with their lives because of what's happening in their school. And so it's just like that exposure. And I was 19 and 20, so I was still pretty young with that. I just think that would be so cool of having some sort of like community capstone project. Like I think social justice really starts in your own backyard. Like, and if you think you live in an area where it's like you don't have an issue, then you're not really in your area. So that's, I think, like what I've learned from this interview of like, yeah, there needs to be a lot more like community stuff exposure with students, because you're coming in from all over the place. You're bringing all these new ideas. How can we apply that to your own community?
Perfect. I love that. Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so we are going to, I don't have anything else. I do appreciate your time and
Yeah, of
just
course.
open to this conversation. It really sounded like we were just talking, not necessarily a class assignment. So I appreciate it.
I know it felt like a podcast. Like I was like, this is so fun. I could talk about this forever.
Oh, that's a good idea. I have to, okay.
Do a little podcast about it.
Okay, got it. Okay, so thank you so much. And I enjoyed working with you.
Yes.
Yeah, and so now it's good to put a face to all the online communication. So I look.
Yes. And even what you were saying in my interview with you of just like kind of getting like the vibe of how you talk and communicate, like it's been so fun. So yeah, it's been awesome working with you.
Yeah, okay. So good luck for the remainder of the semester. I think let me stop. Hold on, let me stop this.
Okay.